Derek had cryptically announced as an urgent security matter affecting our entire community. I sat in the third row next to my sons Marcus and Dylan, who were annoyed at missing their Friday night plans. 3 rows behind me, Javier Artinez sat with his wife Elena and their daughter Sofia. I had not looked back at him even once, though my heart was hammering so hard I was certain everyone could hear it. Derek had been acting strangely for the past 2 weeks. He had stopped sleeping on the couch. He had stopped making his usual deflecting jokes. He had started looking at me with an expression I could not quite read, something between sadness and satisfaction, like a man who had finally solved a puzzle he wished had remained unsolved. That morning he had kissed my forehead before leaving for work, something he had not done in 3 years, and whispered, "I hope you enjoyed feeling safe, Gabi. I really do." I should have known then. I should have grabbed my keys and run. But where would I have gone? And what exactly did I think he knew? The overhead lights dimmed and Derek stood at the front of the room with the projector remote in his hand. He looked different somehow, thinner maybe, or just harder, like something soft inside him had finally calcified into stone. Our neighborhood watch coordinator, Mrs. Chen, sat in the front row looking confused because Derek had insisted on running this meeting himself, said it was too important to delegate, said everyone needed to see this with their own eyes. "Thank you all for coming tonight," Derek began, his voice steady and almost cheerful. "I know Friday nights are precious, especially for those of us with teenagers." A few people chuckled. Marcus shifted beside me. "But what I'm about to show you affects the safety and sanctity of every home in our neighborhood. It's about trust, it's about the security systems we install to protect our families, and it's about what happens when the threat doesn't come from outside our homes, but from within them." My stomach dropped. The room suddenly felt airless and hot despite the air conditioning that hummed overhead. Derek clicked the remote, and the white screen behind him filled with an image of our backyard at night, the timestamp glowing in the corner, November 14th, 2024, 11:58 at night. The camera angle showed our back door clearly, the small porch light creating a circle of yellow illumination. I watched myself appear on screen, in my blue robe, the one I had bought specifically because it made me feel less invisible, less like a woman whose husband had not touched her in years. I watched myself open the door and step aside. I watched Javier Martinez, wearing dark jeans and a hoodie, slip inside my house at exactly midnight. The room went completely silent except for the hum of the projector fan. "This," Derek said, his voice still calm, still almost cheerful, "is the first of 17 recorded incidents over a 4-month period. All at midnight, all while I was asleep on my couch, 20 feet away, too exhausted from my 12-hour shifts to even make it upstairs to my own bedroom. I could not breathe. I could not move. I felt Dylan's body go rigid beside me, felt Marcus turn to stare at me with an expression of absolute horror. Behind me, I heard Elena Martinez gasp, heard her whisper something sharp and furious in Spanish. The neighbors around us had gone from confused to comprehending, and the energy in that room shifted from community meeting to public execution in the space of a single heartbeat. Derek clicked the next slide. Another timestamp. Another midnight. Another moment of my life that I had believed was private, was mine, was the only thing keeping me from disappearing entirely into the ghost I had become in my own marriage. "Let me show you all of them," Derek said, and there was something terrible in his smile, something that looked almost like relief. Every single midnight. To understand how I ended up on that screen, how I ended up destroying everything I had built over 18 years of marriage, you would need to go back 3 years earlier to the night Derek came home from his doctor appointment with a prescription bottle and a face that told me something had fundamentally changed. It was January of 2022, and he had just turned 39. The doctor had found his blood pressure dangerously elevated during a routine physical, said his stress levels and weight gain were putting him at risk for stroke or heart attack, said he needed to start medication immediately and make serious lifestyle changes. Derek had taken the news like he took everything, with a joke and a shrug. He had said, "Guess I'm officially old, babe." He had rattled the pill bottle like maracas. "Next up, erectile dysfunction and early bird specials." He had meant it as a joke. Neither of us knew it was a prophecy. The medication worked beautifully for his blood pressure. Within 2 months, his numbers were perfect. But something else had stopped working, something we did not talk about at first because we both assumed it was temporary, just an adjustment period. Just stress from his job at the warehouse where he supervised 40 employees and dealt with constant deadline pressures and corporate demands for increased productivity with decreased resources. We had always had a good intimate life, not passionate maybe, but consistent, comfortable, connected. It was one of the things I had counted on in our marriage, one of the ways we stayed bonded even when we were too busy or too tired to really talk. By month 3, Derek stopped initiating entirely. When I tried to initiate, he would kiss me briefly and then pull away, claiming exhaustion or back pain or an early morning shift. By month 6, I couldn't remember the last time we had been truly intimate. Couldn't remember the last time my husband had looked at me with desire instead of distraction. I started noticing how he avoided changing clothes in front of me, how he took longer showers alone, how he started sleeping on the couch, claiming his back felt better on the firmer cushions. I suggested he talk to his doctor. He laughed it off, said it was just the medication adjustment, said it would resolve itself, said I was worrying too much as usual. I bought expensive supplements and secretly added them to his morning smoothies. Nothing changed. I planned romantic weekends, bought new lingerie, tried every approach I could think of to rekindle what we had lost. Derek deflected every attempt with humor or irritation or claims of being too tired from work. By the 1-year mark, I stopped trying. The rejection was too painful, too humiliating, too devastating to my sense of myself as a woman my husband desired. I threw away the lingerie, I stopped planning date nights, I started sleeping on my side of the bed in oversized t-shirts, and Derek stayed on the couch, and we developed an unspoken agreement to simply not discuss the enormous absence that had opened up between us. I threw myself into my teaching. I took on extra tutoring shifts. I spent my evenings grading papers and planning lessons and helping Marcus and Dylan with their homework and pretending that I was not 42 years old and trapped in a marriage that had become a sexless, emotionally distant roommate situation. Derek threw himself into work, taking every overtime shift available, installing an elaborate home security system he became obsessed with, coaching Dylan's soccer team, being the fun dad who took the boys to games and movies while I stayed home alone with my lesson plans and my growing sense of invisibility. By year 2, I had started wondering if this was simply my life now, if this was what middle age looked like for women like me, lower middle-class teachers married to stressed-out warehouse supervisors, too busy surviving to actually live, too financially stretched to consider separation, too committed to our children to blow up their stability over something seemingly selfish as my own unfulfilled needs. I told myself I was lucky. I had a husband who worked hard and provided for us. I had 2 healthy children. I had a stable job with benefits. Who was I to complain about missing physical intimacy when so many people had much bigger problems? But late at night, alone in our bedroom, while Derek snored on the couch downstairs, I would lie awake and feel something dangerous growing inside me. It wasn't just sexual frustration, though that was certainly part of it. It was deeper than that. It was the feeling of being utterly unseen, completely unnecessary except as a function, as the person who cooked meals and graded papers and signed permission slips and made sure everyone else's needs were met while my own needs slowly starved to death in the silence we had built around them. The turning point came in September of 2024, nearly 3 years into what I had started calling our dead bedroom in my own head. I had planned a rare evening together, sent the boys to their grandmother's house, made Derek's favorite dinner, put on a dress I hadn't worn in years. I had decided to try one more time, to have one honest conversation about what was happening to us, to ask him directly to see a doctor or a therapist, or at least to acknowledge that we had a problem that was killing our marriage slowly from the inside. Derek came home late from work, exhausted and distracted. He barely noticed the dress or the dinner. We ate mostly in silence. I cleaned up while he collapsed on the couch and turned on a basketball game. I sat beside him, put my hand on his leg, tried to initiate the conversation I had been rehearsing all day. He glanced at me, then back to the television, and said with a tired laugh, "Baby, that ship has sailed. Let's just watch TV." If you're wondering how a 42-year-old high school Spanish teacher ended up destroying her entire life over a neighbor she barely knew, remember this moment when you hear the rest of my story. If this resonates with you at all, if you've ever felt invisible in your own home, consider subscribing because stories like mine don't get told enough, and maybe someone needs to hear that they're not alone in feeling forgotten. Something broke inside me that night. Not dramatically, not with tears or anger, just a quiet, final breaking, like a branch that has been bent too far for too long, finally snapping in the cold. I went upstairs alone, lay in bed staring at the ceiling,
and thought for the first time with absolute clarity, I am 42 years old and I might never feel desired again. Javier Martinez and his family had moved into the house next door in August of 2024, just 1 month before my final breaking point with Derek. He was 45, a divorced architect who worked from home, and he had joint custody of his 15-year-old daughter Sophia. His ex-wife Elena lived across town, but had remained friendly with him, and their co-parenting arrangement seemed remarkably civil compared to most divorced couples I know.
Mrs. Chen stood up from the front row. Derek, I'm not sure this is appropriate for a community meeting. This is a private matter. Is it private? Derek interrupted, and for the first time his voice cracked with actual emotion. Is it private when my neighbor was entering my home multiple times per week? Is it private when my wife was conducting an affair that put our children at risk? Is it private when the security cameras I installed to protect my family captured my own humiliation? He clicked to another slide. This one showed a map with location data, little dots marking Javier's address at midnight on multiple dates. This is her phone's GPS history, in case anyone thinks the video evidence might somehow be misleading. Someone behind me whispered loudly enough for half the room to hear. I always thought she seemed too good to be true. Quiet teacher type. Someone else responded, it's always the quiet ones. If you're feeling angry at what Derek's doing right now, if you think this is too cruel, too public, too humiliating, hit that like button. But keep listening, because the story gets more complicated than you think. And sometimes the person who looks like the villain is actually just someone who's been broken in ways you can't see yet. Derek clicked to a new slide, and my stomach dropped even further. This one showed a photo of our bedroom, taken from the doorway. The bed was neatly made. On one nightstand sat Derek's reading glasses and a half-empty water glass. On my nightstand sat a bottle of lotion and a book I had been reading. But the image was labeled with text, "Our bedroom, where I haven't slept in 2 years because I couldn't face her disappointment every night." The whispers in the room shifted tone slightly, from pure condemnation to confused curiosity. Derek's voice was quieter now, almost conversational. I want everyone here to understand something. I'm not just a humiliated husband. I'm a failure as a man. 3 years ago, I started blood pressure medication that destroyed my ability to be intimate with my wife. Complete erectile dysfunction. Total inability to perform the most basic function of a marriage. The room went silent again, but it was a different kind of silence now. Uncomfortable and pitying. Derek continued, I was embarrassed. I was depressed. I was too ashamed to see a doctor about it, too proud to admit I needed help, too terrified of what it meant about my masculinity to face it directly. So, instead, I avoided my wife. I slept on the couch. I made jokes to deflect serious conversations. I became obsessed with being a provider and protector, because if I couldn't be a lover, at least I could be useful in some other way. He clicked to another photo. This one showed the living room couch with a pillow and blanket, looking sad and makeshift in the empty room. This is where I slept for 2 years while my wife was alone upstairs. This is where I was sleeping, 20 feet away, while she was next door with a man who could give her what I couldn't. And you know what the worst part is? Derek's voice finally broke completely. I don't even entirely blame her. I failed her first. I refused to get help. I let our marriage die because I was too ashamed to admit I was broken. The room's energy shifted again. Some people looked at Derek with sympathy now. Others looked at me with slightly less judgment. A few looked back and forth between us, trying to reconcile the dueling narratives of betrayal and abandonment. Javier stood up from his seat. Derek, man, I'm sorry. This is my fault. I pursued her. She was lonely, and I took advantage. Sit down, Martinez, Derek said coldly. You're not the hero of this story either. You knew she was married. You knew I was right next door. You made a choice too. Elena stood up then, turned to face the room, and spoke directly to me for the first time. How long were you planning to keep sleeping with my ex-husband while pretending to be my friend?
How long were you going to wave to me at neighborhood events while sneaking into his bed behind my back? You're divorced, I heard myself say, my first words since the presentation began. My voice sounded strange and distant. You've been divorced for 3 years. That doesn't mean I want to watch him have an affair with my neighbor. That doesn't mean I want Sophia exposed to this. We live in this community too. Dylan stood up next to me. I want to go home, he said quietly. Please, Mom, I want to go home. I stood on shaking legs. The room was staring at me, all those neighbors who had smiled at me at block parties and Halloween events and community yard sales, now looking at me like I was something contaminated and toxic. I wanted to explain. I wanted to tell them about the 3 years of loneliness, the rejection, the slow death of feeling invisible in my own home. I wanted them to understand that I had not set out to hurt anyone, that I had just been trying to survive my own suffocation. But what was there to say that would make any difference? Derek had been broken, yes. Derek had abandoned our intimacy, yes. But I had been the one to betray our vows. I had been the one to sneak around. I had been the one to risk our children's stability from midnight hours with a man I barely knew. I'm sorry, I said, and my voice cracked. I'm so sorry. Sorry you did it, or sorry you got caught? I could not answer that question. I was not sure I knew the answer myself. I walked out of the community center with Dylan's hand gripping mine tightly. Marcus was outside, sitting on the curb with his head in his hands. The three of us stood there in the parking lot, while inside the community center, Derek presumably finished his presentation and accepted the sympathy and support of our neighbors who now knew every humiliating detail of our broken marriage. We drove home in complete silence. The boys went straight to their rooms without a word. I sat in our dark living room, on the couch where Derek had slept for 2 years, and waited for him to come home and tell me what happened next. He did not come home that night or the next night. He stayed with his brother across town, and I stayed in our house with our traumatized sons, and our neighborhood buzzed with gossip about the teacher who had destroyed her family for a few midnight hours with a divorced architect next door. Derek came home on Sunday afternoon when the boys were at their grandmother's house. I had sent them there because I could not bear seeing the disappointment and confusion in their eyes every time they looked at me. Marcus had barely spoken since the meeting. Dylan had cried himself to sleep both nights. I had destroyed their sense of security, their trust in me, their belief that our family was stable and safe. I was sitting at the kitchen table when Derek walked in. He looked exhausted, thinner somehow, like the presentation had drained something essential from him. We stared at each other across the kitchen for a long moment, two people who had shared 18 years of life together, suddenly feeling like absolute strangers. Was that necessary? I finally asked, humiliating me in front of the entire neighborhood, traumatizing our sons? Was it necessary for you to fuck our neighbor at midnight while I slept downstairs? Were 4 months of sneaking around necessary? Was destroying our marriage necessary? You destroyed it first. The words burst out of me with 3 years of pent-up frustration. You destroyed it when you refused to touch me for 3 years, when you turned away every time I tried to initiate intimacy, when you wouldn't see a doctor or try therapy or even acknowledge that we had a problem. I have erectile dysfunction, complete inability to perform. Do you have any idea how humiliating that is? Do you have any concept of what it does to a man's sense of self to not be able to satisfy his wife? So you just gave up? I shouted back. You just decided our intimate life was over without discussing it with me? Without considering my needs at all? What was I supposed to do, Gabby? What magical solution was I supposed to find when my medication makes it impossible to function and I'm too ashamed to admit I need help? You were supposed to try. I was crying now, 3 years of loneliness pouring out. You were supposed to care enough about me to at least try. There are doctors, therapies, medications, alternatives. but you didn't pursue any of them because you were too proud or too embarrassed or too wrapped up in your own shame to consider what your dysfunction was doing to me. So that justifies an affair? My medical problem justifies you betraying our entire marriage? I'm not saying it justifies it. I wiped my face angrily. I'm saying I was drowning, Derek. I was 42 years old and feeling invisible in my own home. You stopped seeing me as a woman. You stopped touching me at all, not just sexually, but emotionally. No affection, no intimacy of any kind, just avoidance and deflection, and you sleeping on that couch while I disappeared into nothing upstairs. Derek sat down heavily at the table across from me. You think I don't know that. You think I don't hate myself for it. Every single day I watched you pull away from me, and I knew it was my fault, and I still couldn't make myself face it. I was depressed, Gabby, clinically depressed. My inability to function sexually made me feel like less than a man, and instead of getting help, I just shut down completely. Then we should have talked about it, I said more quietly. We should have been honest with each other instead of building this wall of silence. Would talking have stopped you from